Hello and welcome to another brand new edition of Jack Talks with Humans. It's exactly what it sounds like. I talk with humans who I'm curious about, and then I put it on YouTube. It's kind of a thing I do. I'll also put up the audio on Spotify. Of course, you can find this as a podcast there. Today, I have a very exciting human to talk with. I'm thrilled about this. We have today as a guest the co-founder of the Satanic Temple, also the subject of the documentary film Hail Satan. We have with us Lucien Greaves. Hello, Lucien. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing well. Hopefully, you're keeping safe and healthy there in the midst of this COVID-19 pandemic. I hope you are doing well in that regard.
Yeah, I think I've been overdoing it by most people's standards. I've been relatively isolated now for the entirety of the 9 months we're into this.
I'm kind of the same way. My wife and I are both just naturally introverts, so we've been sort of just abiding by the social distancing guidelines and various regulations on our own. We didn't really need the assistance of the mandates, although those do become important from a public health standpoint.
Yeah,
I'm going to talk with you, Lucien, today.
Is...
By the way, I didn't even ask in advance. Lucien, is that the best way to address you?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, awesome. I didn't want to leave out any preferred name there. I want to hear some about the work that we are doing. Here I am implicating myself in the Satanic Temple, the work that you are doing. And so we'll focus in on that. Let's just start with, by way of introduction, would you be willing just to share a little bit about the mission of the Satanic Temple? If you were going to characterize your movement or your work, how might you describe it?
Yeah, well, it's a very complex organization, and people like to try to narrow it down to being one thing, and often that one thing is more a reflection of what their biases are rather than what the Satanic Temple is. You'll see the conservative press say that we're a trolling prank. You'll see others saying that we're merely political activists. You'll see some insisting that we're an authentic religious movement. And the thing is, none of these things are mutually exclusive. We can be pranksters in authentic religion. We can have, we can very much fight for political advocacy to see to it that our rights are equally respected in all of those things. And we're the largest non-theistic satanic organization in the world, and probably one of the fastest growing religions. It's hard to say because academics and pollsters are a little slow to pick up on our presence. So I really would be interested to see some kind of outside academic kind of documentation of the rise of this, because I feel like in the not too distant future, non-theistic religion is going to be a real dominant force in kind of our cultural philosophical thought. And I think the Satanic Temple is really paving the way for that.
Wonderful. I do have a couple of follow-up questions about that, which I'll get to in a moment. But let's just start with how long has the Satanic Temple been around? How long have you been in existence as a movement?
I think it was 2013 we founded ourselves. I'm terrible with keeping track of time. That sounds about right. It's been a really a real fast expansion, a real quick ride from there to here.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I hear you on that. I'm the same way. My wife constantly teases me because I can't keep track of where I am in time and space. And so give or take since 2013, that's a good enough answer. Especially now in the midst of the pandemic, I certainly cannot keep track of what day of the week it is or any such thing. So I hear you on that one. I think the first time I became familiar with your work, I spotted you on Fox News. I'm not typically a Fox News viewer or a cable news viewer at all, but I spotted you doing some interviews there about some of the work you're doing. And so I've been familiar with your work for a while. I'm gonna do something here. I'm gonna ask my least favorite question first, if that's all right. The intent, Lucien and I had a chance to talk before we started filming and recording here. The intent of this little YouTube project I'm doing is it's about listening honestly. And you mentioned already sometimes that there are messages that are put out in the press, particularly from conservative voices, that are really a distortion or a misunderstanding of what it is that you actually are standing for, what some of your work is intended to what message it is you're seeking. And so the goal here in conversations like this, conversation with you and with others, it's about listening honestly. And so that being said, we are coming, I was going to say coming out of a time. I think we are in the midst of a time where there has been a resurgence of all sorts of conspiracy thinking being amplified at all levels of our government, and also, of course, taking hold on social media, various press outlets, things like that. The premise is not so much a new idea, but the idea is that there are, quote, Satan worshiping, there's a Satan worshiping cabal, some sort of an underground effort of Satan worshipers who are out seeking to take over our government. Again, this is my least favorite question because I want to focus on the work you actually do. But let me just ask you, Lucien, do you worship Satan? Are you a Satan worshiping organization?
Yeah, I guess I should have started with that explanation that we don't, instead of just using the terminology non-theistic, assuming everybody knows what that means. But what we do mean by non-theistic is that we don't advocate for any supernatural beliefs, and we see the power of the poetry and metaphor of religious structures, but we don't believe they need to be taken literally in order to be authentic. And certainly we're proof in and of ourselves that you don't need to decipher your religion literally in order for it to really be a reflection of your deeply held beliefs and help you identify with each other in a way that is, I feel, could only be defined as religious. So no, we see Satan as a metaphorical literary construct that signifies the ultimate rebel against tyranny.
That's helpful for me. I appreciate you clarifying that. A lot of the people who might be listening to or watching this YouTube video may not have come to that understanding about which many, I believe, modern Satanists hold. I don't want to belabor the point, but I guess my impression, and I just want to get your feedback on this, or whether or not my impression is correct, is that it's not uncommon for those who consider themselves practicing Satanists to reject the supernatural, or to reject a literal Satan. Let me give you a little context. I grew up in conservative Christian circles. I actually have a theology degree from a conservative Bible college. And most of the time when they talk about Satanists or when they talk about satanic practice, the default is kind of to sort of a Michelle Remembers, sort of a Rosemary's Baby type of a actual literal satanic force that is being worshipped. And so I guess that's helpful to me. In your experience, I know, of course, you do not speak there at the Satanic Temple on behalf of all people who identify as Satanists, but in your experience, is it accurate that that it's a common sort of a thread throughout modern Satanism, this rejection of the supernatural, or rejection of the literal Satan?
Yeah, and if you look at Satan, the story of Satan in relation to Satanism, it begins to make a whole lot of sense that people who would have an affinity for the story of Satan in the Miltonian sense as being this rebel against tyranny would also reject supernaturalism, and supernaturalism being really kind of the problem of a theocratic mindset, the oppression of mainstream religion is rooted in those kinds of superstitious beliefs that you're supposed to believe just by fiat alone. You're supposed to have this blind faith in these ideas for which there isn't evidence. And further, if you're examining the story of Satan within the Bible, within literary tradition, you see it's so very inconsistent that you're kind of choosing a narrative. And if you're choosing that Miltonian Satan, you're bypassing the earlier biblical interpretation of Satan as meaning merely just an adversary and not an isolate character. So you kind of see, if you if you really start learning about this character of Satan, how it's really grown and evolved in a literary way, and obviously wasn't a real character in history. But the you can talk about the dominance of non-theistic perspectives of Satanism within Satanism, but I think it's also important to point out to people that this isn't unique to Satanism. I mean, there's non-theistic Jews, and if you look at something like the Clergy Project, where you have a lot of Christians who don't want to give up their Christian community, and they're pastors, they're other people who, for various reasons, can't admit to their non-belief, but they just no longer believe in the supernatural aspects of their religious beliefs. They exist. They're just not open about it. And I think that's going to change in the future. I think there's no reason for people to feel that they need to hold on to beliefs that are intellectually insulting or otherwise disproven by empirical evidence in order to maintain their sense of ethics and sense of community. And I think once a community can agree that that's not a prerequisite anymore, you're going to see some radical changes within people's mindset of what religion means, and you're going to see a real shift in the religious disposition of I think the Western world, and maybe beyond that, in phases. Hard to say how it'll play out, but I do think that that's the future of religion.
Yeah, that's helpful for me to think about, because first of all, hearing that it's not just this idea of a non-theistic religion is not exclusive to Satanism necessarily, but can be applied in broader context as well. The other thing that is always stands out to me is that it's not necessarily a new thing. A lot of times, people, at least some people who might be prone to launching some criticisms, they might suggest that this is the new chic, hip version of Satanism, where we're trying to redefine what it means or something. Trying to, in line with changes in our popular culture, we're trying to make it more palatable or something like that. If you look at least in my understanding, you look back at somebody like Anton LaVey, and I want to be cautious in invoking that name. I want to be clear that I'm not making a connection between LaVey and Satanism and the Satanic Temple, or anyone who practices a modern manifestation of Satanism. My point is, though, in popular consciousness or in popular culture, someone like Anton LaVey is often viewed as the founder of modern Satanism. And the Church of Satan in the 60s, things like that. Even that form of Satanism, then, as my understanding, they had a rejection of the supernatural as well. Is that correct? That there's a history, I guess, in Satanism of this non-theistic expression. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is LaVey was always a little unclear. At a certain point, he was more definitively non-theistic, in the sense that he was open about not worshiping a literal Satan. But he always did advocate for this idea of magic, and his successor, too, Peter Gilmore, wrote some essay about how magic doesn't confer upon you, because they have magical rituals and things like that. His claim was that magic doesn't confer upon you supernatural powers, but it does give you access to the supernormal, and he didn't bother to really explain the difference there, or what he really meant. It just seemed like a way of claiming supernaturalism without using the word, because it was beginning to fall out of fashion. I mean, we don't advocate for supernaturalism by any name, whether it be supernormal or whatever. After LaVey died, his not wife, but the mother of his child, who he lived with, and his official biographer said that he did in fact believe in a literal Satan. So I guess it's kind of still an open question. But the Church of Satan now, which is pretty much just a Twitter feed, they hold fast to the idea that they're atheistic and always have been.
I appreciate you indulging me on that question. My goal was not necessarily to go down a rabbit hole and talk necessarily about. I had a selfish motivation in that question. Growing up in religious circles, oftentimes that was one of the names that was invoked in talking about Satanism. Even so far as you are, I'm sure, aware, throughout the Satanic Panic era, people making claims of studying under Anton LaVey and all these various rituals and rites. And so that was my reason for asking. Is just this is not.
It's
Go ahead, sorry.
absolutely worth clarifying, and it's infuriating to me to see. We'll go through these kinds of explanations about what non-theistic religion means to us. We'll point out the various forms of non-theistic religions, because even though there's non-theistic Jews and non-theistic Christians, there's also more non-theistic religions. So Jainism is a non-theistic religion. Confucianism is a non-theistic religion. Some Buddhists are non-theistic Buddhists. It's not terribly uncommon, and yet it's also not uncommon for us to see articles about ourselves where some mostly conservative press will be writing about one of our campaigns, talk about something we're taking to court or whatever, and they'll explain that we're a non-theistic religious organization. They'll go through a summary of what we say that means, and then they'll conclude by saying, so in short, they're just trolls trying to leverage religious liberty laws, in a way that denigrates and mocks other religions or whatever. Somehow they translate non-theistic religion into no authentic belief, and therefore, everything we're doing is just some kind of just some kind of histrionic display that we're doing in order to assert our rights, or usually in their perspective, not even assert our rights, but try to deny the rights of others, because we have a real kind of growing backward notion now of what religious liberty is. The idea that if you're not allowed to discriminate against others in the name of your religion, then your religion is being oppressed. So us, of course, seeking equal access or equal rights in any way in the name of our religious identification is contextualized as an assault on good God-fearing Christians.
Yeah, and what you've described there is exactly at the heart of what I'm getting at with my little YouTube project and some writing and things I'm doing, just on a personal level among the people who know me. This idea of dishonest listening, this idea of listening to what someone, or at least pretending to listen to what someone else says, but then to twist what it is they're actually saying into take their perspective and instead put my own words or my own thoughts, my own commentary there on what that actually includes. And so, as a matter of fact, I don't mean to pick on the poor man, but I think the first time I saw you, you were on Tucker Carlson. Now this may not have been your first interview with him, but I remember in that interview him essentially doing what you've described, listening to what you said and then saying, "You're just trolling, right?" That was actually my next follow-up question for you. You've made it clear to me just in that brief explanation that this is not, of course, moving on from this idea of labeling everything, putting everything on one basket. As you described, one can hold authentic beliefs and also engage in what you might call, quote unquote, trolling for the purpose of proving a point. It sounds to me, though, I guess what's your reaction when someone says to you that the Satanic Temple is just trolling? What might be your response?
It's a hard one, because you see people even say that affectionately about us.
Sure.
There's people who like what we're doing in the name of advancing secularism or pluralism, and getting people to think about how these things cut both ways and that type of thing. And they want it to be a prank. There's a lot of people who are burned by religion, like what we were doing, and hate the idea of us being an actual religion. And they don't want us to be that. They want us to be some kind of clever prank. So I would get that too a lot, where there'd be these articles written applauding what we're doing and saying, these guys are the best trolls. I'd have to wonder, well, what do you really mean by trolling? To me, that kind of indicates that we're really not going, we're really not fighting towards our openly stated goal, but we're really just reveling in the turmoil that it caused.
Hmm.
And that's not true. I think the big, the big frightening secret about the Satanic Temple is that we're really upfront and straightforward and honest about everything we're doing. Well, people are trying to read between the lines. I think we're living in a bizarre, backward world where you have to make ludicrous supernatural claims for people to take you seriously in this domain. And we're outright saying we don't believe literally in this, and therefore we're being called liars. It's just a really kind of it's a real perversion to me. I mean, Tucker Carlson, obviously, yeah, you're right. He just couldn't get past it. And I also think he was just infuriated by the fact that I wasn't taking the bait. You know, he really wanted me to defend Satanism, and I didn't care to try to do that in the course of a 3-minute segment on Fox. It's just impossible. It's too complicated an issue. So I wasn't going to let him get away with the cognitive dissonance of him claiming himself to be some kind of free speech, free expression, religious liberty warrior, while also suggesting that we didn't have a right to do what we were doing, that we didn't have a right. And in both times he had me on his show, he had me on because we were talking about, legal claims that we were making. And for the most part, we make those claims about equal access and that kind of thing. So I wasn't going to have him just denigrate Satanism and say we're not worthy of equal representation in the public square, without defending his point of view, without him kind of reconciling, the hypocrisy in himself. And he couldn't do that either time. I mean, you can see both of these interviews on YouTube, and I think he made a fool of himself talking to me. And it's usually like that with me when I talk to conservative press. They have a lot to kind of work through when they're understanding this. And I wondered originally when we first started going into this, what would some of the, typically Christian nationalist litigation groups make of us? What would they be willing to defend us in court when their whole mission claims to be one of religious liberty? And you have an organization like Liberty Counsel, which is a litigious group, a litigation group in the Christian nationalism network that's always pushing for their idea of what religious liberty means. And religious liberty to them is prayer in schools, all that kind of thing. They're always fighting for, religious expression in the public square, that kind of thing. And their claim is that they're not specifically, uniquely an evangelical organization, but they're fighting for religion in general. So when we were doing our after school Satan Club project, where we were looking to put after school clubs into schools where we would teach critical thinking, and we weren't going to do any religious proselytizing, anything like that, but we were putting these satanic after school clubs into schools in order to counterbalance proselytizing evangelical after school groups, so kids didn't have to be subjected to that if their parents just needed, as a lot of parents did, kind of a babysitting or an extra hour or somewhere to put their kids until they got out of work or whatever else. We reached out to Liberty Counsel, or I don't think we got the opportunity to reach out to them before they made a comment, before they released a press release saying that we had no right. We had no right doing this because we were, according to them, only looking to attack legitimate religious organizations. So that's the way in which they, that's the foundation upon which their hypocrisy is built. They just define us in whichever way is convenient for them, so that they don't have to face up to the natural consequence of what they're advocating for.
I will have. I've got a couple of questions. I want to ask some more specifically about the work you do. But since we were talking about this idea of trolling a moment ago, I'll just backtrack just a hair. Um, well, first of all, let me just say I hear what you're saying about even people who are fond of your work, who sometimes like that term. I will be honest in saying sometimes when I see the projects that the Satanic Temple takes on, I cannot help but get a little bit of a smile or a smirk, just sometimes at the clever manifestation of the way that you might be putting forth your message. So I hear what you're saying there, but the idea of being a religion, I guess. Let me ask you. I see on your website you've got these 7 tenets, these kind of, I guess, fundamental tenets of the Satanic Temple. First question is, are those legitimately representative of your deeply held beliefs as your organization? But then the second follow-up question to that is, how did you arrive at these? I guess, is there some text or some particular authority by which these are derived? How might have you come to these conclusions in terms of your fundamental tenets?
Well, they were actually co-authored by me and the co-founder of the Satanic Temple, Malcolm Jerry, but it came from a real background in trying to. I had a real affinity for Satanism for my entire adult life, and had read about had read all the romantic Satanists books from the romantic literary period in which Satan was invoked. Just the whole kind of literary tradition of Satan and Satanism, and met with all different flavors of self-identified Satanists for a good deal of time, talked to a good number of people, in really trying to figure out what was the common understanding of Satanism. What was it psychologically that drove people to identify as Satanists, and what were kind of the optimal ethics that could be derived from this? What really spoke to this? This was something I had to figure out about myself as much as lay out for other people, because sometimes the feeling of something precedes the articulation of it, and so you have to kind of arrive at what you think it means after the fact. And that's something that kind of happened when we founded the Satanic Temple, and we're concluding that drive to recognize that which is true by empirical evidence, and the kind of universal ethics we thought could be best applied, we also thought were something that would be most readily embraced by the satanic community. This would really speak to why people would follow this, or would become the reason that people did, and made sense in light of the kind of metaphorical construct that was being used around it, if that makes any sense. Maybe you have to be there.
Yeah, I appreciate that insight there. I guess what I'm taking from that, among other insights, these are not based on a particular individual satanic text somewhere. It's not that you have some sort of many Christians point to the Bible as their underlying authority for these tenets. It sounds as if this is more of kind of exploring historical ideas and kind of crystallizing some notions and different philosophical aspects, as opposed to coming from a central authority.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Right. It was kind of like boiling down, I guess, what Satanism optimally means to somebody who is able to look beyond all that kind of cultural programming that's been beaten upon them. People who feel, otherwise oppressed by superstitious religions and that kind of thing. We felt that this was kind of the best of it. This was kind of the best that could be gotten from that kind of mindset. Certainly a whole lot better than the insistence that somebody who rejects mainstream religion needs also be cruel and anti-human.
Yeah, I was going to. I considered reading through the tenets here while we're talking, but for two reasons, I'm not going to do that. One, I think it's a little rude to invite you as a guest and then read to you your own tenets. I feel like that may not be the best use of our conversation. The second thing is, though, I'm aware that some people may be watching this YouTube video or listening. I know there are quite a few friends of mine in the evangelical Christian community around here. Rather than me sharing those now, I will encourage you a bit of a homework assignment here. If you want to see what it is that these tenets are, these 7 tenets, they are readily available. Of course, I'm going to put up the Satanic Temple's website. If you're curious what those specific 7 tenets are, I encourage you to, with honesty, take a look at those. There at the website. I want to spend the time I've got with you, Lucien, here to talk about some of the work that you're doing. And as you mentioned, your organization has been involved in many efforts, various campaigns, and so I just want to somewhat a little bit of cherry picking going on here. I've just selected a few to ask you about, and of course I'll follow your lead if there are more things you want to add there. I'll point out that the first thing I saw when I went to your website, up at the top, it said empathy, reason, advocacy, and so the term advocacy is there in some of the first ideas that you come across when you first look at your materials. I want to ask you about this Baphomet statue. This has been a project of yours for a while. For anybody who's unfamiliar with this idea of the Baphomet statue, would you be willing just to kind of give us the nutshell overview? What is the purpose of this statue, and how is it used with your campaign?
Yeah, I believe it was 2013, the time we first announced the Baphomet statue campaign. And the idea actually got pressed before we even had a design, before we had an artist, before the Baphomet statue was made. But there was a Ten Commandments monument on the Capitol grounds in Oklahoma City, in Oklahoma. And they were following a kind of Project Blitz, which is maybe that's getting into a whole nother topic. But anyways, there's kind of a well-networked Christian nationalist movement really looking to install a theocracy into the United States. And as part of that, they have their mindless servants within the legislatures in different states, in politics all over, and mostly in the Republican Party, of course. But there was this model legislation going around that argued that, that moved to put Ten Commandments monuments on public grounds on the argument that it was not a violation of the Establishment Clause, because the act would call for there to be a private donation of the Ten Commandments monument. So this model legislation would put it on somebody in the legislature, the Senate, or a politician otherwise able to endorse a bill to also privately donate a Ten Commandments monument, put it on the Capitol grounds, and make the claim that because it's privately donated, it's not an Establishment Clause violation. But what that also does is it leaves the public grounds open to any and all public donations of monuments. So realizing that, we said, okay, you have your Ten Commandments monument. We would like to donate a satanic monument of our own. And at the beginning, we were just testing the waters. We sent a letter to Oklahoma. We didn't think that would get the press that it did. But just the very idea was enough to have people writing articles and saying, "Oh, holy shit! Satanists are going to put a monument on the public grounds." And so we immediately started crowdfunding, because monuments are very expensive to manufacture, and we had no idea how much one would cost. So we started crowdfunding for like $20,000, which was woefully insufficient for the ultimate cost in any case. But that's a different story. But so we had to come up with designs, and we wanted our design to be able to answer to all the claims being made about the Ten Commandments monument. The Ten Commandments monument was supposed to according to this legislation, these acts being passed, say something about U.S. jurisprudence. They were claiming that the Ten Commandments monument or that the Ten Commandments themselves were integral in the codification of constitutional law, which is actually not anywhere close to the truth. But they were also claiming, of course, that it had a secular historical meaning and all these types of things. So we took an older Satanized image of Baphomet from occult historian Eliphas Levi. And as I explained to Megyn Kelly when I was on Fox, the image is at least as old as Mormonism. So if they wanted to claim it wasn't historical enough or therefore not religious, they'd have to say, I guess, the same thing about Mormons. But in any case, I also made the case that the Baphomet Monument was going to stand as a kind of homage to those who were killed in witch hunts, and by that kind of negative influence in history, we learned something about the importance of secular law ourselves. The importance of holding to this idea of innocent until proven guilty. The idea of having empirical evidence rather than spectral, so in that way, we thought we were really addressing the concerns that they said were symbolized with the Ten Commandments monument. But the image itself is of this sabbatic goat, the goat of Mendes, and there's all these kinds of binary images attached to it. It's part animal, part human, points upward, points downward, has a one point up pentacle on its forehead and an inverted pentagram behind its head, and has caduceus in the center, indicating reconciliation and negotiation. And to us, all those binaries being contained on the same image was sending a message of reconciliation of the opposites. And in that way, we thought that having it alongside Ten Commandments monument really completed this message as an endorsement of pluralism and free expression. And we felt in that way it really kind of embodied the best of our constitutional values. So that's the argument we built up for the Baphomet monument. And of course, we had it made. And now if you do a Google search for Baphomet, surely you'll see that monument come up one of the first things. It's probably the most controversial work of art I can think of in recent history. And in Oklahoma, we never had the opportunity to put it on the public grounds because before we even filed our lawsuit against Oklahoma, because they weren't even responding to our requests, the Oklahoma Supreme Court demanded that the Ten Commandments monument come down because of an ACLU case against it, and it clearly violated a church-state separation as imposed by their state constitution. But now, and ever since then, we've been fighting the same battle in Arkansas, where Arkansas flatly refused to put up our monument while they did put up the Ten Commandments monument. And we were supposed to have our trial for that back in July, and it got delayed due to COVID. And I think it would have gotten delayed anyways, because I think they were pushing for a delay in the trial as it is. I really don't know where that is right now. We haven't heard back for a while. I know there's some motions the judge has yet to rule on, but we have a really strong case in Arkansas, and that's not to say we'll win. People often look at cases that we lose or get dismissed or whatever, and they take that to mean that we fought the wrong fight, that we made the wrong arguments or whatever. And I think the horrific truth that people don't want to recognize is that a lot of this is way too subjectively available to the interpretations of a judge who can take it whichever way they really want. And now with the Trump installed Supreme Court, I think it's a real hard road ahead for us.
Yeah, certainly so. Christian nationalism is. I recently wrote a post on Facebook about this. I find that is. The way I framed it was that white supremacy is a pressing threat in our country that needs to be reckoned with, and I would put probably almost at that same level, I think, the threat of Christian nationalism. And this is coming from someone who grew up in church, grew up in a conservative Christian setting. And so I actually got, earlier this year, a Christian Facebook friend of mine sent me a message, and it featured your Baphomet statue that you mentioned. And so I just want to address briefly, you've of course given a wonderful description of the background and the intent behind this. But speaking of dishonest listening here, the first thing that was in this message was, one, the claim that the Satanic Temple, or that some supporters of the Satanic Temple, have placed Baphomet statues at, quote, numerous courthouses and legislatures around the country. And then the second part of the sentiment that was in this image that was sent to me in the form of a meme was that also that the goal of this statue was to tear down Christianity by taking down the Ten Commandments and leaving up the Baphomet in its place. And so, at the risk of being insulting by asking you to respond to this, let's start, I guess, first with the factual accuracy about whether or not this Baphomet statue is currently in front of any legislatures, if there are more than one of them, and then we'll follow up with the second part of that claim, that your intent is to tear down Christian imagery while putting up satanic imagery in its place. Do you care to respond to that meme I received from a well-intentioned Facebook friend?
Oh yeah, no insult taken. I like to address these things, and in fact, I wrote a whole Patreon piece. And in fact, you can check out my Patreon, and my stuff is available. At least my stuff from the beginning of the pandemic is available to the public for free. I knew a lot of my subscribers would start having some financial difficulties during the pandemic, and if they couldn't pay, I didn't want to make them pay, which was a risk to me, because that's actually my only income right now during the pandemic. So opening it up
Wow.
for free really took the risk of losing a lot of income and make me have to walk back on that. But for the most part, it really hasn't hurt. So people who can subscribe do. But anyways, if you're just curious, it's nice also to have it available to the public to see. But I wrote a piece specifically addressing the proliferation of memes and posts for a while there, anyways, when Confederate memorials and monuments were being torn down. I was seeing all this exposition, people, these memes and everything, where people were saying, well, if you're going to tear these down, why don't you tear this down? There'd be a picture of our Baphomet monument. And there were so many reasons why this was a false equivalence, but not the least of which was that, no, the Baphomet monument is not on public grounds anywhere right now. And it was horrifying to me to see people advocating for the destruction of the Baphomet monument, and doing so to audiences who might not understand that difference, might not care, and might start looking for the private property we have it held on, burn our headquarters down or whatever else, just because our Baphomet monument is in it, thinking that that's somehow equivalent to a public Confederate memorial being torn down, something idiotic like that. So no, there's only one Baphomet monument. It's not publicly displayed. And as to the question of whether the intention of the Baphomet monument is to take the Ten Commandments monument down, I spoke earlier about the horrific truth about the Satanic Temple is that we're open and honest about what we say, and most people just don't take what we're saying at face value and think there's something more to it. But when we say we want to put the Baphomet monument up on public grounds where there's a Ten Commandments monument, that's what we fucking mean. We want to put it there. We want the Ten Commandments monument to be there. And we've always been clear about the fact that we do not want the Baphomet monument to be on public grounds exclusive to any other displays of religious speech. It's important to the monument itself, to the display of the monument. The monument is not properly displayed publicly unless there is a Ten Commandments monument or a Ganesha statue or something else. There has to be other religious monuments about it, because the Baphomet Monument is about pluralism. It's about that reconciliation of opposites. It's about multiple viewpoints. It's about diversity and inclusion. And it just doesn't work if it has an exclusive forum in the public. So if that can't be dealt with, if in order to prevent the Baphomet Monument from being put on the public grounds, they have to take down the Ten Commandments monument, well then fine, but what we're really asking for is to have the Baphomet monument there with the Ten Commandments monument. And why I say fine though, if they're taking down the Ten Commandments monument, is because the worst case scenario for us is that any religious voice has that exclusive access to the public grounds like that, co-opting the power and the authority of the government or government grounds or whatever, giving off the impression that some religions are more equal than others, or that we aren't really in a pluralistic society, but we're in a society that values one viewpoint, one religious viewpoint over others. That's the worst case scenario for us. So, I mean, take down the Ten Commandments monument, go ahead. But if you're not, certainly, I think the Baphomet monument is appropriate.
Well, I appreciate your time and patience in spelling that out. And again, I mentioned I was hoping not to be insulting with that. I know it can be frustrating to be very open and clear about what the intended message is, only then to be asked to clarify yet again. So I appreciate your willingness to do that. I could talk to you all day. I could just pick your brain all day long. But of course, I won't keep you here too much longer. I want to respect your time. And you've been very generous in talking with me. I want to ask you just about a few other projects. So I know it's going to be kind of a change of subject slightly, but I'd like to ask about a few other campaigns or efforts that I've noticed in your social media and also online on your website. One of them, I think, is pertinent for some in response to some of the misinformation that is already out there. I mentioned earlier. I was referring to QAnon and some of the resurgence of conspiracy theories. I say resurgence because many of these ideas have been around for a very long time, and they've just been repackaged in something like QAnon. But what stood out to me looking at your website is I saw a billboard campaign, and it was linked to the Protect Children campaign. And so, frankly, with so many unfounded rumors and conspiracy theories flying around about this alleged Satan-worshiping cabal who are out to harm children, it was fascinating to me to find there openly on your webpage information about seeking to protect children. Would you be willing to share a little bit about the Protect Children Project, what that is meant to do, and maybe some of the work you've done with that?
Yeah, traditional theistic religions don't have a great track record with children. And we find that corporal punishment is, I mean, we're not the only ones who find this. Academic explorations of corporal punishment find that it's really tied in with religious fundamentalism and other backwards beliefs and practices. But I don't know what the number of school districts is now that still allows a faculty to punitively beat children. And we're not talking, because I run into these. You'll have to forgive me for anticipating the pushback, because I've run into these arguments before. So I know you're not even saying these things, and I'm already addressing them.
Of course.
But every time I bring this up, people will say, like, well, what about when a child is beating another child to death? That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about a child being disruptive in class and then being, spanked by the teacher or something like that. We're talking punitive, supposedly corrective beatings being placed on kids for bad behavior or whatever else. none of the empirical evidence supports that this is a great corrective to a child's misbehavior. And in fact, everything points to this being, something very, very regressive, something that harms a child's development, cognitive development, behavioral development. There's no good excuse for beating children, for these kind of punitive beings, or isolation rooms. Sometimes they throw children in isolation rooms that
Right.
have been outlawed in some prisons as inhumane. And we find that to be outrageous. So on the religious liberty grounds, if you identify with Satanism, you can file for an exemption from the school being able to beat the child, and we will take that to court. We haven't done that yet, and unfortunately, what it will take is having a plaintiff, a child who claimed exemption from being beaten in schools and then being beaten by a member of faculty anyway. Then we will sue on the grounds that our religious rights weren't respected. But that's something we're doing, and that also kind of ties in with our after-school Satan Club, where again, we're not teaching children Satanism or making any comments in our curriculum about religious perspectives at all. The kids will know that this is a course we're being taught by Satanists, but our idea was give them critical thinking exercises, other self-directed learning exercises. And one thing about our after-school Satan Club program that people surely don't know is that we did a lot of consultation with real experts in education, people from Harvard School of Education and other people with education backgrounds. But that's been on hiatus for some time because we can't get insurance. We need liability insurance to be able to be in the schools, and none of the insurance agencies will cover us. And we're not sure how to approach that just yet. So we might litigate against the states because the states demand that we have the insurance. The states don't insure us themselves. And then we go to private insurers who won't insure us for who we are. So it's a bizarre kind of new legal territory, I think. We're questioning where if the state's going to require us to have something like this, if the state should provide something like this. So I don't know, but that's something in process right now that we're trying to figure out. But you mentioned
I just wanted to make sure that I didn't leave that out. So what I'll do is I normally do these things unedited. I just kind of post beginning to end. But since you, in the middle of your comments there were a few times that we lost you. So what I'll do is I may just edit a portion of the video where we insert this question, if that's all right with you.
Yeah, certainly.
Okay, I don't want anybody to think I'm doing any sneaky or tricky editing over here. So you were talking to us about, you mentioned about the Protect Children campaign, this idea of helping to remove corporal punishment from schools and tactics such as isolation rooms. And you followed up with something there in your comments. And again, I've edited this. Anybody watching this, we had a brief audio snag. So I am editing this back in. You mentioned something that I wanted to ask you a follow-up question about. I read quite a bit over the past decade. It's been an interesting topic I like to explore, is the Satanic Panic of primarily the 80s and the early 1990s up until about mid-90s or so. Of course, these are some ideas that have been around for a while. But this notion, there's both kind of what you can think of as kind of the eye-rolling sort of comical end of things, where I heard things like there's the devil is behind Pokemon cards, and the devil is behind the Smurfs and Masters of the Universe and He-Man on television, and Power Rangers and Ninja Turtles, those sort of things. But then there's also the other end of this satanic panic, this mass hysteria surrounding alleged satanic ritual abuse, as the terminology that was used, and also this notion of repressed trauma, things happening that people have repressed. And so you mentioned Gray Faction. Could you just tell us a bit about Gray Faction and what the mission is, what the work about Gray Faction is all about?
Yeah, the segue to that was your mention of QAnon for me. And to my mind, QAnon's a continuation of that satanic panic, which, though the academics typically date the end of the satanic panic is around 1995, it never really ended. It just kind of lost its mainstream credibility. It was no longer really the subject of serious news broadcasts and daytime talk shows anymore. It had been too discredited. But the Satanic Panic went well beyond lone hysterical voices crying against backward masking, Dungeons and Dragons, drugs drawing people to Satanism, or even evangelical Christians or fundamentalists trying to reinstill people with proper God-fearing respect for Satan or whatever else. There was a really damaging fringe movement within the mental health profession that had this idea that certain behaviors in people were indicative of past traumas, and that the only way to retrieve those traumas was through hypnosis or other such techniques, so that they could remember them, assimilate them into their mind, and thereby be healed. So they would use hypnosis and other tactics to draw these memories out, and in the same way that people will do, that hypnotherapists will do to bring forth memories, supposed memories of alien abduction or past lives. And of course, this has been entirely debunked, and the veracity of recovered memories is practically nil and not worth taking seriously as something that's historically accurate, but still something held onto by a segment of the mental health community. And that's what we're really fighting against. There's a professional organization called the International Society for the Study of Trauma and Dissociation, and they still advocate for these ideas. And in fact, in their annual conferences, they talk about Illuminati mind control and ritual abuse, and they are able to offer continuing education units to professionals for attending these batshit crazy lectures. And they do this kind of behind the scenes, and they get away with it. And the APA hasn't put a stop to it, the American Psychiatric Association, and they really should. And we really see the damage in this, of course, as being self-identified Satanists ourselves. Having people creating alleged victims of Satanism is a very damaging thing. But now I think the world can see the damage and the persistence of these narratives by seeing QAnon pop up. And QAnon is latched onto many of these narratives, advocated for some 30 years now by the ISSTD. And a lot of people don't realize these intellectual roots of QAnon and how these conspiracy theories have been propagated all this time. How this isn't unique, how they're just kind of picking up and amplifying something that's always been there. And I'm really kind of hoping that QAnon has pushed it over the edge, where now we're going to finally see some kind of actual collapse of the manufacturers of Satanic Panic. Because believe me, some of these people have been at it since the 80s. Some of these people attached to the Satanic Panic from the 80s, attached to the ISSTD, and have been propagating through the ISSTD from there. Guys like Dr. Colin Ross, and Richard Clough and others who actually, hold practice, have people who are unfortunate enough to be their clients, and could be instilled with crippling delusions of a satanic threat that just doesn't exist. At a point where they're their most mentally vulnerable and going in for help. And that's something our Grey Faction campaign has been fighting against for well before QAnon was ever a thing. We've been filing complaints against these therapists. We've been writing letters to the APA trying to get them to revoke the ability of the ISSTD to give out continuing education units, and really kind of grow public awareness that this is happening, that this is something, that this is a clear and present danger to people. When you have people who are mentally vulnerable going in, they should be really getting somebody with the authoritative ability to give somebody a better grounding in reality. not give them these fearful delusions that will keep them isolated and indoors and fearful of the outside world thereafter. So I encourage people to check out grayfaction.org and see the work we've been doing there, and seeing some of the egregious behaviors of people within the mental health profession. And hopefully it gives people at least a better idea of the real need for reform within the mental health profession in the United States and beyond.
Well, I appreciate that explanation. That's my wife is a mental health therapist, and I currently work at in a mental health and prevention agency. I'm not a therapist, but I do a lot of community work in the prevention end of things with behavioral health. And when I started hearing some of these QAnon theories emerge, my first thought was this was just more of the same sort of tactics that we had seen, with some of the same ideas, some of it just being repackaged anti-Semitism that has been around for centuries, but then some of these notions of the satanic panic. And anybody who's listening to this, if you're not familiar with that era, I actually may have some upcoming videos and some interviews about that very topic. Just to give you an indication, many of you listeners who are connected to me personally, you live here with me in Ohio. It was not just something isolated to different areas of the country. Here in Ohio, just about an hour and a half, 2 hours north of where I live. Back in the 1980s, there was a sheriff who excavated an entire field, believing that he would find the remains of, he said, dozens of people who had been killed in satanic rituals. And the basis for all of this came from what Lucien was describing of these supposedly recovered memories that came about from some of these practitioners, where children were being put in the position of testifying that these things had taken place. The most probably well-known case of that being the McMartin preschool. So all that to say, I appreciate you taking the time to describe that. And Gray Faction is your effort to continue to draw attention to some of these practices. So thank you for sharing that. Stay tuned. Go ahead.
It's important to point out, you mentioned the repackaged anti-Semitism. When it comes to deep conspiracy theories, unfortunately, that anti-Semitism is always going to be there. And history, it's because history adds legitimacy to the minds of people who are attached to these things. So if you see somebody going down the conspiracist spiral and you're saying, well, there's nothing anti-Semitic about it, they're going to get there. In my experience, they will get there. And it's because our conspiracy theories, since the French Revolution at least, have always had this anti-Semitic bent. Certainly there were anti-Semitic conspiracy theories and blood libel before the French Revolution, but there, you really saw it crystallize and become dominant. And a lot of what's said about Satanists were just repackaged blood libel accusations against Jews previously, earlier on. And I think it's important to recognize these things, to recognize how conspiracy theories are not benign. Nazi Germany was predicated on a conspiracy theory of a Jewish threat to dominate the world and overtake Germany. QAnon is not benign by any means, and it may sound not even worth pointing out because a lot of people don't think QAnon is benign, but I do see a lot of people giving QAnon more of a pass, I think, than they would other openly ostentatious Nazi groups or whatever else. But I think, you start going down that spiral and you start inventing invisible enemies, it's inevitable that those enemies are going to become real people. You're going to start laying the blame on real, actual people. And QAnon does that. And that there is nothing not horrific about this, and there's nothing funny about it, and it really demands our attention and our pushback, and things like QAnon are not to be taken lightly, and they're to be fought. They're to be fought until they're destroyed.
A very timely and appropriate call for both things like personal responsibility in terms of things like critical thinking, but also from a justice standpoint of making sure that we are taking seriously the threat of some of this pernicious way of thinking. So I feel like I've only scratched the surface with you, but I've kept you for more than an hour, Lucien. So I do want to let you go here. I'll begin to conclude our conversation. I just have a few closing questions for you, just by way of wrapping things up. First of all, thank you so much for your time and talking with me. I'm literally a random person in his dining room in Ohio who's just been talking with people who I'm curious with. So I'm thrilled that you took the time to talk with me. Big thanks
They're
to
always
you.
the best kinds of interviews. I mean, this is worlds better than being on Fox News or on some or speaking to a mainstream paper where they're looking for sound bites. It's always the podcast where people are genuinely interested in talking that make for the best interviews, I think.
You heard it here first, everybody. Lucien has said that I'm a better interviewer than Tucker Carlson. You heard it here first. We'll put that on my.
Well, that's a pretty low bar, but yeah.
True. That's true. That's true. I feel bad. Hey, Tucker Carlson, if you're listening to my podcast and you want to unsully your good name, send me an email. I'll talk to you too. Why not? But thanks again, Lucien. One question, it's a silly one, but I ask everybody I talk to, just a kind of a quick way to humanize anybody I talk with. The question is this: pineapple on pizza, yes or no?
Yeah. I mean, it depends on your mood. I'm more of an anchovy guy, so that's its own kind of controversy. But I can handle pineapple.
Sounds as if, as in most cases, you are respecting individual choice of the pizza topping there. I appreciate that. I'll make note.
I don't think even I could do anchovy and pineapple simultaneously.
Wow. Yeah, although I feel like talking about the Baphomet Monument there, having this nice plurality going on, I feel as if you're obligated now to have at least one pizza that's half anchovy and half pineapple. I feel like you must reckon the two.
Yeah, I am the kind of guy, though, like if I'm traveling overseas and I see something on the menu that just does not look like it should exist, I'll order it.
Sometimes, if I'm in a brave mood, I'll do the same. But there's a certain adventurous sort of mindset when it comes to trying out new things like that. Do you have any other hobbies when you're not doing the work at the Satanic Temple? What other sort of activities do you engage in?
It's all kind of tied into the Satanic Temple now, but I read a lot. I'm an avid reader. I only started playing some video games like during this pandemic because I'm pretty much not going anywhere. But some people might not realize that I've recorded an album recently. Actually, we were in the studio just before the pandemic, finished recording, and we were going to start touring in March. I believe our first show was like March 22nd, and we ended up locking down around March 14th, or at least I decided to isolate by then. It's not out yet, but I worked with Justin Pearson from a band called The Locust and Luke Henshaw from Planet B. And we pulled in after the fact drummer Dave Lombardo, who used to be with Slayer and is now with Mr. Bungle. But that album should be out. I don't know. We're still working on the final mixes and videos are being made, but eventually that'll be there too. But that was really like the first thing I worked on since the Satanic Temple. That wasn't just strictly Satanic Temple, so it was kind of a nice reprieve to work on something artistic for a little while.
Wonderful. What is that? What's the name of your band? Do you go by a particular name, or is it?
Satanic Planet. And we've set up a social media presence, and we're going to start releasing things as we can. We have great material still in mix phase, unfortunately, but we have some great videos being worked out by some really good visual artists and things like that. So be on the lookout. That'll be appearing.
Fantastic. Satanic Planet. Be on the lookout for updates related to that. My last question for you: if someone's interested in learning more, if they want to follow you, you've already mentioned your Patreon page, which once again, everybody, Lucien has graciously made a lot of the content there available for free at this time. So take advantage of that if you want to learn more about his content while the opportunity is there. And of course, you can consider any sponsorships options that are available. Aside from that, how can people connect with you or learn more about the Satanic Temple and your work?
I'm far more active on Twitter than I am on Facebook. I absolutely hate Facebook and think it should be destroyed, but that's a whole other topic. I mean, Twitter's not too terribly much better, but but I'm more active there in any case. But yeah, check my Twitter feed and check in with my Patreon, and you'll be up to date. And if you're just interested in the Satanic Temple and not necessarily interested in the things I'm doing, of course, check out the Satanic Temple website. Look for where your local chapters are, and there's plenty of ways to connect with the Satanic community.
Awesome. Well, here in the video, those of you who are watching this on YouTube, you'll see I've already put up some information on the screen, but I'll be sure to put those web addresses up. You can also find those in the comments. If you're listening along on Spotify, probably doing a quick search for the Satanic Temple, we'll find that website there. And you can always visit my YouTube channel if you want to see the links listed in the description. Once again, Lucien, I'm thrilled that you talked with me. I'm honored by the conversation that we've had. I feel like it was just kind of a stone skipping across a pond way of looking into some of the things you've been up to since on or about 2013. So thanks again for being with me. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Those of you who might be listening in to my little YouTube channel and or podcast, stay tuned. I've got some other guests lined up who are going to chat with me. The goal is just to honestly listen to one another. You can do that too. You don't have to wait on me. I'm not even a professional. I'm just sitting in my dining room. So as you interact with those, be sure to listen honestly. I encourage you to wear your mask, to wash your hands, and stay safe. We will see you next time. Have a good one.